Hi everyone, we're so excited to bring you this story. It's called The Kingdom of Kind and it's from a very nice Christian free curriculum for language arts called The Good and the Beautiful. So why not go over to goodandbeautiful.com and check it out for yourself. But for now, here's the story. We hope you enjoy it as much as we do.
Chapter 1, The Peasant and the Prince. Many years ago, there was a beautiful kingdom called Kind. How it got its name, you'll discover in another story. The kingdom was a beautiful sight. If you use your imagination, you might be able to picture the vast forest and the turquoise lake, and especially the delightful rolling hills of rich soil and soft green grass. The population consisted of knights, peasants, merchants, and royalty. On a chilly autumn evening, daylight was just starting to fade and night was descending on the land. A prince was riding back to the castle when his carriage went around a corner and suddenly swerved as the driver tried to avoid a stretch of thick oozing mud. Much to the prince's disappointment, they did not avoid the muck. When the carriage came to an abrupt halt as two of the wheels stuck deep into the moisty, mushy mud. "Oh, please," cried the prince to his driver with a hint of impatience. "Hurry and get us out of here. It is growing cold, and this is not the safest location. Besides, I'm having a dinner appointment with the king at 7. The prince stuck his head out of the window and sighed as the men took out coils of rope and went to work trying to free the carriage. The slight motion to the right of the mud patch caught the prince's attention. An old feeble woman wearing a worn-patched dress and a ragged shawl came hobbling in the direction of the carriage. "Please, your highness," she answered with a gentle, humble voice. Have you any food?" With the motion in her voice, she told the prince of her sad plight. Her husband and her 2 children had died years ago, and her fingers had become old and useless. She could no longer weave and sew to earn a living. This very day she had been cast out of her home because she had no money to pay her rent of her dilapidated, run-down cottage. She was travelling to the relative's home many miles distant, but had no way to observe food or shelter until she arrived. The prince took her story into consideration. Initially, he was suspicious of the old woman's story, and he was most definitely upset by this disturbance. Surely she has brought up her own conditions upon herself by not planning ahead and saving her money. The prince rationalized. "I cannot help even every poor peasant with a sad plight. The castle would be overwhelmed with beggars." But his conscience picked at him. He wanted the poorly dressed woman to go away. He didn't like looking at her old ragged clothes and her sorrowful face. He thought of the leather patch resting on his thigh that was filled with gold coins. There was no question that even 1 coin would delight the old woman and feed her for an entire week. That would not disappoint to lose just 1 coin. He opened his bag to fish out a single coin with feeling of satisfaction. He leaned out of the window and threw the shiny coin past the mud, aiming at the woman's feet. But as he did so, 7 coins spilled out of the bag quickly and sank into the oozing mud. Bothering, the prince shook his head. This wretched situation has spoiled my evening, he thought miserably. He had no intention of getting dirty by searching for the coins, nor did he want to delay any further by having his drivers search for the lost money. Just then the drivers jumped back into the carriage. "It's all taken care of, your highness," said the tall man. "We will have you back in the castle in 20 minutes. As the carriage started to roll, the prince motioned to the old woman, who was wrapping her old worn shawl tightly around her shoulders. "If you can find those coins," said the prince, "they are yours to keep." As the carriage drove on, the prince took the solution into consideration. His initial reaction was to be extremely annoyed that he had lost his precious coins, but upon further reflection he decided that the woman would most likely find the coins. Yes, she might have to get a little muddy, thought the prince, but she is sure to find the coins. Then she'll be fed for nearly 2 months. With a feeling of satisfaction, the prince settled down into his plump velvet cushions, and his proud expression crept across his face. "Yes," he thought, "I am a mighty generous tonight. I nearly spoilt the old woman by giving her 8 coins. He sighed. Surely she didn't need 8 coins. She may have not even lived long enough to need them. Even 1 coin would have shown her great compassion. But surely no one else will show as much consideration as I did." Within 3 minutes he had forgotten all about the old woman's plight, and he thought about the delicious broth, lamb steaks, most gingerbread, and luscious custard he'd soon be eating by the bright candlelight in the warm, spacious castle. Not long after the prince left, another poor peasant came to the same patch of mud. He was shivering as he pulled his cart of tools. When he veered to the right to avoid the deep mud, his expression changed to confusion. The daylight was nearly gone, but he could make out the shape of an old woman kneeling and digging the mud. He was frightened at first, but then he was saddened. Darkness was dropping down on the vast valley, and temperatures was becoming colder by the minute. He feared the woman had lost her mind and was in danger out on the road alone. She also had to be freezing. But he rationalized to himself, "I cannot do anything to help this woman's sad plight. I myself am poor and must get home to my family before it gets too dark. Someone will come along and help her. Perhaps her family is already looking for her. Woman, go home," he called gently but firmly. The old woman looked up, and "I have no home anymore." She pointed to the mud. "I am searching for the gold coins that fell into the mud," she said with despair. The peasant shook his head, thinking the woman was indeed crazy. He hurried on his way home. The thought of the woman would not leave him. As he walked through his doorway, he had a strong impression that he should go back and help her. He kissed his wife and explained the situation to her. He described the poor woman's meagre clothes and crazy actions. His wife's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot leave her there alone to stay outdoors in the cold." The poor woman said she had no home. The peasant said, "That is the right decision," replied his wife. With an emotion, she hugged him tightly. "Hurry, I will start preparing for our special guest." The peasant ran along the dirt road, but with his now empty cart bumping behind him. It began to rain lightly. The moisture snuffed out the oil lamp the peasant was using to light the road. As the peasant passed on, the rain stopped, and the skies began to clear. The peasant used the stars in the vast sky, the bright moonlight and occasionally the flash of a distant light to find his way. Also, he wished he had made that decision to help the woman when he first saw her. All he could do now was hurry back to find her. At last he reached the location where he had found the woman, but he did not see her. Disappointment flooded his heart, but then he heard a noise to his right. He turned and found the woman curled up under a bush, trembling with cold. She had not been able to find any of the coins that had stuck into the mud. "Hello," said the man. "I've come back for you. I would like to invite you to join my wife and me for a supper in a warm bed." The woman was so cold and the end of the rope that she could only give an appreciative nod and a weak smile. The man picked her up and hoisted her gently into the cart. She was muddy and also wet from the rain. He took off his own coat and wrapped it around the woman. Finally, they reached the peasant's small, humble cottage, but to the woman it seemed like a palace. Bright, cheerful flames danced in the fireplace. The smell of boiled potato and steaming cabbage filled the air, and the light rain made a soft pattering noise on the roof. The peasant's wife motioned to the old woman, "Come sit by the fire and get dry." The old woman wept at the kindness of the peasant family and rejoiced in the warm shelter and food. The peasant and his wife slept on the floor, giving up their own bed to the woman. As soon as the old lady's head hit the pillow, she was out like a light and slept in the warmth and peace with a smile on her face all night. The next day they sent the old woman on her way to the relative's house in clean, dry clothes and a basket full of food. The angels in heaven rejoiced over the peasant's actions, and peace and joy were showered down on the humble man and his wife. But the prince and his majority of inhabitants of the kingdom was not like the peasants and his wife. There was constant contention in the kingdom, and selfishness lived in the hearts of many. Only a few families in the kingdom could actually be considered nice. So you might ask, why is the kingdom called the kingdom of kind? Well, you must be patient. It will take a few more stories until that will be revealed.
Chapter 2, The Three Keys. Do you remember the prince in the last story who threw a coin at the old lady? Let me tell you more about this young man. His name is Eric, Prince Eric. His story is an important piece of the puzzle that will tell us why his kingdom was named Kind. Was Prince Eric kind? No, he wasn't. He was so self-centered that he was scarcely aware of all the other people around him, unless, of course, he needed them for something. For instance, he had never once given any thought to who prepared his superb meals 3 times a day. The meals were just always served to him on fancy dishes. He had never even wondered who took care of the acres of splendid gardens around the castle. He never once had thanked his father, the King of Kind, for anything. And he had never been required to do any work. He had servants do all his work for him. He was very shrewd when it came to manipulating people and getting his way, but he was not very wise. In fact, he knew very little about the world around him. A young man named Nathan was assigned to do all the prince's reading and studying so the prince could be free to ride his horse, take naps, and go hunting. Perhaps this is why Prince Eric felt so generous when he tossed the poor old woman a coin. If I were to write a story about another time he gave something to someone, it would go something like this. Once upon a time, the prince never gave anything to anyone. The end. Do you think that would be an interesting story? I don't either. So let's continue with this story. It's much more interesting. This story takes place a week after the story of the old woman and the coins. The sunset was painting the sky a vivid yellow hue and laying patterns of light across the vast lawns surrounding the castle. But Prince Eric on the back patio of the castle didn't see nature's artwork. He was too busy trying to evade Nathan, who liked to give him a daily report of his work. At a marble table partially hidden behind a bush, the prince sat counting gold coins. He loved the clink that they made as he stacked them. "Ah, Prince Eric," Nathan called out as he strode onto the patio. "There you are. I have come to give you a report." Prince Eric gave a disappointed grunt. "Today," Nathan began with a broad smile, "I was able to memorize for you an entire page of poetry. I read for you about the birds that live in the kingdom. I began learning for you how to make bronze statues, and I learned 20 new words in French for you. I hope your highness is pleased with what you learnt today." Prince Eric looked up with a scowl. "Well, I think it is a shame that I am learning only one foreign language. You should try learn Italian too. People will think I'm smarter if I learn Italian. Start tomorrow." Nathan was elated. "Yes, your highness," replied Nathan in a jolly voice. "Thank you very much." The prince was annoyed. "You act as if you actually enjoy learning and studying all this stuff. It bothers me. Stop it this instant. I'm giving you more duties and more work. Why would you thank me for that?" "Sir, I truly like studying," said Nathan, unable to conceal his broad smile. "But why?" the prince inquired. "Because it makes me happy." The prince held up a gold coin. "How many gold coins do you have?" "Why, 2, sir." The prince laughed. "2? You have 2 gold coins, and you think you are happy? I have 500,000 gold coins, 300 rubies, and 800 diamonds." "And yet," said Nathan boldly, "you are not happy." The prince stood up abruptly. "What did you say?" Nathan stood as silent as a statue, realizing that he made a grave mistake by saying this to the prince out loud. "Of course I am happy," cried the prince. "How dare you tell a lie? Go back home to your tiny little cottage, wherever that may be, and never come back to the castle. Never again." And so Nathan lost his treasured position at the castle. The king hired an old, cranky scholar to take Nathan's place, studying and learning for the prince. But Nathan's words would not leave the prince, and yet you are not happy. The prince began to realize that indeed he was not happy. "I have the same routine all the time," the prince thought. "That is why I'm not happy." For years the prince had requested rolls and grapefruit for breakfast every morning. The rolls at the castle were soft and buttery. They practically melted in the prince's mouth, and the grapefruits in the kingdom were the sweetest, juiciest grapefruit in all the world. "No more rolls and grapefruit for breakfast," the prince ordered. "I want something different every morning. I can never eat the same thing for breakfast again." For 3 weeks he was served something different every morning. Tasty biscuits and gravy, silky cheese fondue, warm apple streusel, vegetable omelettes, strawberry crepes, herb sausages, fluffy blueberry muffins, cinnamon toast, boiled eggs, funnel cakes, fresh orange juice, peaches and cream, golden croissants, Italian donuts dipped in chocolate sauce, baked apples with walnuts and maple syrup, Belgian waffles with whipped cream, hash browns, and nice protein on the side with a pineapple mustard glaze. But alas, the prince was no happier than before. And when the cook had expended all of her ideas and could think of nothing new to make him for breakfast, the prince ordered that she be cast out of the castle forever. Then the prince decided that he was bored, intolerably, insufferably bored. "Boredom must be the cause of my unhappiness," he decided adamantly, and he demanded his servants bring him the best entertainment there was to be found. Jesters juggled and told riddles, skilled musicians played the harp and flute beautifully. Singers sang as smooth and sweet as nightingales. The bards dramatically recited poetry and long, eloquent eulogies. That's speeches in praise of a person or thing in honor of the prince. The prince enjoyed the entertainment, but every time it ended, his unhappiness was still there with him, like a dark cloak covering the sunshine. So his servants searched high and low for more thrilling entertainment. They brought in dancing polar bears and emperor penguins from Antarctica, fire swallowers and snake charmers from far-off lands, and actors with extravagant costumes and scenery. All of this only left the prince feeling even more unsatisfied. But the prince realized that if he was busy, he did not have much time to reflect on his unhappiness. So he tried to evade his unhappiness by throwing himself into huge, important projects. He had statues created of himself, a spacious golden tower built to hold his jewels, and a new wardrobe made of elaborate clothes. But still, the prince was utterly unhappy. His gloom only seemed to increase. One day, out of the blue, the prince announced his intentions to take a voyage around the world in search of happiness. He left the next week with 100 of his knights. For an entire year, he searched the vast world for happiness. He met powerful kings, he stayed in luxurious palaces, he sailed on magnificent ships, and he ate exotic fruits and gourmet foods. But still, he did not find happiness. On his voyage back home, a terrible squall arose, and the ship was pushed into some sharp rocks. The ship sank, and the prince clung to a barrel for 2 days on the cold ocean, scarcely staying alive. Finally, the prince was washed ashore on a little island just as the sun was setting. Exhausted, thirsty, and starving, the prince crawled to a stream of fresh water and drank. After eating a few handfuls of wild berries that he found on the banks of the stream, his strength was expended, and he fell into a deep sleep on the grassy bank. In the morning, the sunlight danced on the prince's face, and the gentle breeze whispered in his ears. When he awoke, he felt strangely peaceful and contented. He drank from the clear stream again, and then heard a noise, laughter. Looking around a bush, the prince saw a little girl, poorly dressed, and her father, even more poorly dressed, filling jugs in the stream. The father sang a tune as his daughter smiled and giggled. Then the little girl picked wildflowers and danced and twirled in the streaming sunlight. Her father caught her up in his arms and hoisted her onto his shoulders, and they started on a path to the forest. "Wait!" cried the prince. The father turned in surprise as the prince weakly advanced towards them. He was a pitiful sight, with filthy, torn clothes, a dirt-smudged face, and dishevelled hair. "I am Prince Eric. I was shipwrecked. I demand that you tell me, where am I?" The man bowed slightly. "You are on a small island in your kingdom, the furthest island from the castle, and I fear that you will be here for quite some time. No one on the island has a boat big enough to sail the great ocean. A ship comes once every 3 months with supplies. The next ship is not due to arrive for 2 months. "Outrageous!" screamed the prince. "I cannot stay on this pitiful island." "Is it pitiful?" asked the man with a kind smile. "Why, we rather love this place." The prince narrowed his eyes as he studied the man. "You remind me of someone." "Yes, I am sure I do," said the man. "I am Peter. Perhaps if you come to our cottage with us, you will discover the reason why I remind you of someone. You are welcome to stay and eat with us until the boat arrives in July." "I absolutely will not stay in a cottage," stated the prince as he stomped his foot. "As you wish," replied the man, and he turned to leave. The prince suddenly realized his plight. If he did not go with the man, where would he stay? What would he do? "Fine," called the prince. "I will come with you after all." When they arrived at the cottage, the prince was hesitant to go through the doorway. He had never entered a cottage before, and he did not know what to expect. But as he stepped into the small one-room cottage, the aroma of fresh-baked wheat bread surrounded him. Gentle yellow sunlight poured in through the windows, and white curtains fluttered peacefully in the breeze. The man's wife sat on a rocking chair, cradling a pudgy baby with soft black curls. "I feel odd," said the prince as he stepped further into the cottage. "Very odd indeed. I feel as if—" But his words were stopped short by a cheery, familiar voice behind him. "Hello, father. Hello, mother. I'm home." The prince turned and stood face to face with his former servant, Nathan. Now the prince understood why Peter had seemed familiar. He was Nathan's father. Nathan stood with his mouth aghast in utter astonishment. The prince did not know how to react either. Here he was in bedraggled clothing, starving and at the complete mercy of this family when he had been so cruel to their son. But Peter quickly explained the situation, and Nathan closed his mouth, bowed to the prince and said, "Prince Eric, you must be starving. Please have a seat and we will serve you." The prince was feeling even more odd. He did not say a word as he took a seat at the wooden table. He ate in total silence, secretly savouring the warm, nutty bread, boiled carrots and roasted chicken. As he observed the family, he became more and more amazed at what he saw. Here, in this tiny one-room cottage, he had found happiness. Something deep inside of him knew it, and something deep inside of him longed for a piece of it. He stood up. "I demand you tell me how you found the key to happiness. I have been to the corners of the earth in search of it, but it is here that I find it, and I insist that you give me the key this very moment." The room became instantly silent, but Peter soon spoke up as a wise plan formed in his mind. "Your Highness, there are 3 keys to happiness. but I will only share the keys with you on one condition, that you do exactly as I say for the rest of the time that you are here." "Absolutely not," cried the king. "I do whatever I want and no one tells me what to do." "Then I shall not give the keys to you, sir," said Peter. "I shall throw you in prison when I return home," declared the prince. "So be it," said Peter, beginning to clear away the dirty dishes. For 3 days the prince demanded the keys to happiness, and Peter continued to withhold them. Peter would not share the keys unless the prince agreed to do whatever Peter asked. The prince had no intention of taking orders from this man, but finally, after seeing how adamant and happy Peter was, the prince gave in and agreed to Peter's terms. "We begin in the morning," cried Peter happily. As the family and the prince ate their porridge and cream the next morning, Peter asked the prince a question. "Who cooked your food at the castle?" "Why, the cook, of course." "Yes, but who was the cook? What was her name?" "I have no idea," said the prince. "I never stepped foot inside the kitchen. I never had reason to meet her." "I see," said Peter. "And so you never thanked her for your food?" "Of course not," said the prince with annoyance evident in his voice. "Of course not. A prince is never required to thank a servant. A prince is never required to thank anyone." As the dishes were being cleared, Peter asked gently, "Who cooked your meal today, Prince Eric?" "Your wife, of course," replied Prince Eric. "You could thank her." "I will not." "I insist," said Peter. "Do you not remember our deal?" Prince Eric swallowed and squeaked out a tiny, "Thank you." Peter then took the prince to a meadow close to his cottage. He laid out a blanket for the prince to sit on and said, "I will return in 2 hours. When I return, I will ask you to tell me 40 things that you enjoyed observing here. 40 things that you are grateful for in this field." "Impossible," objected the prince. "I will not." "I'll be back in 2 hours," called Peter over his shoulder as he left. "And if you do not have 40 things, our deal is over." The prince sat for an entire hour before he even thought of his first thing. He had no idea what he was supposed to be looking for. What was he supposed to enjoy in a field away from all his fancy things? But the threat of never finding the keys he desperately wanted made him try hard. And then it happened. Near the edge of the blanket, a beautiful bright blue butterfly floated gently down onto a single white flower. The prince was fascinated and hardly dared breathe for fear of disturbing the butterfly and making it leave. The tiny wings, the vibrant colour, the wonder of the tiny creature. The prince felt something stir inside of him, but he hardly knew what it was. "I like you, little fellow," the prince said. "I like watching you. You are first on my list." After that, it was not hard for the prince to come up with 40 things that he enjoyed observing. In fact, he came up with 50 things for which he was grateful. He could not wait for Peter to return. He ran wildly to the cottage and he even let out a little whoop as the breeze pushed back his hair. "Yes, little breeze, I enjoy you too. That is 51 things." He arrived in the cottage out of breath, and his words gushed out as Peter listened with utter pleasure. "I enjoy eagles. I enjoy soft grass and sunshine. I enjoy little earthworms burrowing in the ground. I enjoy the smell of flowers. Oh, and I definitely enjoy clouds. I enjoy the sound of the stream, the song of the birds." And his list went on. "Well then," Peter said, "we should thank the one who created all those things." Peter folded his arms and bowed his head. "Go ahead, Eric." "I most certainly will not," the prince began, but then he faltered as he remembered that he must. "Well, perhaps you can show me how," asked the prince quietly. The next morning, Peter announced that Prince Eric was not going to eat any more bread until he took wheat from the fields and baked his own bread. The prince held a stalk of wheat in his hand. "There is no way that bread is made from this weed," he said. Peter smiled. "You're going to need a lot more than just one stalk. Let's get started." Prince Eric learned that day how to cut wheat, gather it in sheaves, and thresh it, which is beating it with a flail on a threshing floor to remove the grains from the rest of the inedible part of the plant called the chaff. He learned how to grind the wheat at a mill. He learned how to knead flour into a dough and make bread. But he learned much more that day. He learned to enjoy his muscles working as he breathed in the fresh, sweet air and felt the warm sun on his skin. He learned to appreciate all the effort that went into making this one loaf of bread. And as he finally took a bite of the warm bread he had made all by himself, he felt the deep feeling of satisfaction and contentment that work can bring you. Weeks went by, and the prince had a drastic change of heart. There was a deep goodness inside of him that longed to surface and find life, and under the gentle guidance of Peter and Nathan, it did come alive, and the 3 keys to happiness were planted deep into his heart. July came much too quickly for Eric, who felt as if he would rather stay in this humble cottage than return to his castle, but he was also eager to share the keys he had found with his kingdom. So he bade farewell to the family, boarded the ship, and returned to the lofty castle. At dinner the first night, the prince astonished everyone by thanking every servant, and he made his way to the kitchen, where he gave a hearty hug and thank you to the cook. But that was nothing compared to what he did next. The next day, he insisted that he cook and serve breakfast for all the servants, and that was nothing compared to what he did the day after that. Just as the sun was peeping over the hills and waking the grass, the prince was seen out in the fields with the servants, ploughing and sowing seeds and singing as he did so. He thanked everyone all the time for everything: the gardeners, the stable boy, the tailor, the blacksmith, his father, and especially the Creator God who made all the things he enjoyed. And he never failed to notice the brightness of the stars, the blueness of the sky, or the softness of a flower petal. He never again bade anyone else to learn for him. In fact, he could not learn enough. He wanted to know about everything, and he devoured books as if they were chocolate cakes. He turned his golden tower into a library that was open to anyone in the kingdom. He traded in his luxurious wardrobe of clothing for a few outfits of simple, comfortable clothes to wear himself, and 500 nice dresses that he personally gave out to peasant girls. "These things are simply not done," cried his father with outrage. "No prince does these things." "You mean," said Prince Eric, "that no prince has ever done these things before. I am a prince, and I am doing these things, and I love it, father." And over the weeks, the prince taught his father about the keys that he had found. The king also could not contain himself when he learnt how to find happiness. Together, father and son discovered endless ways to find happiness. It was so easy once they discovered the 3 keys: gratitude, service, and work. But there was a joy the prince was missing, and that is what we will read about in the next story. So until then, perhaps you can follow in Prince Eric's steps and find 40 things around you right now that you enjoy. When was the last time you thanked your Creator God for them? Chapter 3, The Baker's Daughter. Prince Eric had a problem. In fact, he was distraught. He needed a wife. Now, in most stories, the king might throw a ball to help the prince find a lovely princess, but Prince Eric's father had already done that. In fact, the king had already thrown 7 balls for the prince. All the young ladies throughout the kingdom had been invited. At each ball, orchestras played, enormous vases of sweet-scented orchids lined the ballroom, and fruit punch, meringue pies, ginger snaps, and sugar-dusted sourdough donuts were served. But the balls just left the prince fatigued and downhearted. He could not find the kind of young lady he wanted to marry. You see, almost all the people from the kingdom of Kind were extremely selfish and thoughtless. The women had cruel tongues, they gossiped constantly and fought with one another. The men were rough and spiteful, always scheming up ways to take advantage of others. Men and women avoided hard work, and they let their houses and yards become untidy and run down. The children were naughty, they coughed without covering their mouths, they never said please or thank you, they punched each other, and they bit each other like little gnats. Even the pets were ill-behaved and continually nipped and growled and gnawed up all the furniture. Prince Eric sadly acknowledged that he had set a bad example for his kingdom for many, many years. He knew it was going to be tough to change his kingdom, and his heart ached. How long has the kingdom been like this? Prince Eric wondered. He sought the answer in the castle's magnificent library by reading all the books he could find that gave a history of the kingdom. What he learned intrigued him. Prince Eric's father was the 10th king of the kingdom. Eric read books about all the kings that had reigned except for the first 2. There was nothing written about the first 2 kings. One cold, foggy day, Prince Eric was in the library searching once again for any information on the first 2 kings that had reigned in his land. A servant's footsteps echoed in the vast stone library, and Eric turned to greet the servant. "Christian, you have brought my lunch. How kind and thoughtful of you." Christian looked confused. Prince Eric had changed from a vain, spoiled young man to suddenly being kind, thoughtful man only 2 months ago, and the servants were still not used to his new behavior. They especially were not used to being called by their first names. No prince they had ever heard of had bothered to find out his servants' names. But Prince Eric had memorized the name of every servant in his castle by now. "Your Highness," Christian said as he set the lunch tray on a table, "I'm just doing my job. I was assigned to bring you lunch today." "And you do such a superb job, Christian. Thank you for remembering to bring 2 lunches." "You're welcome," replied Christian with an acknowledging bow of his head. "The cook said you always request 2 lunches." "And that," said Prince Eric as he pulled out a chair and gestured towards it, "is because I always ask the servant to stay and eat with me. Please sit down. I'm so hungry that my stomach is grumbling." The meal started out pleasantly, but when Eric bit into his roll, he frowned, set the roll down, and sighed. "Why, what is it, sire?" inquired Christian. "It's the roll. I appreciate the effort that went into making it, but it is a far cry from the rolls we used to have at the castle. In a fit of rage, I banished our amazing baker from the castle. She baked the most delicious rolls. They were moist, buttery, and flaky, and practically melted in your mouth, and I had them every morning since I was a little boy. I have had this kingdom searched high and low for that baker. Oh, how dearly I want to invite her, or rather implore her, to come back. But she cannot be found anywhere. She seems to have utterly vanished, and I have expended all my ideas to find her. No stone has been unturned in our search, so I fear I must resign myself to a life without my treasured rolls." Just then another servant appeared and bowed. "Your Highness, I am sad to announce that your father has fallen ill and requests your presence immediately." Prince Eric hurried to his father's sleeping chambers and clutched his father's hand. "Dear son," the king said, "I am getting old, and I become fatigued easily now. Now I am very ill. I may not live many more months. You have brought me so much joy, my son. You have taught me the keys of happiness. Now I desire only one more thing before I die. You must marry. Not only do I desire to see you wed to a kind, lovely bride, but the law says the prince must be married in order to become king. Oh, father, I want to be married more than anything, but I cannot find a young woman anywhere with the character that I'm looking for. But I will continue to try, father, I will." Far away from the castle, on the outermost edge of the kingdom, lived a young woman named Molly. Molly was the daughter of Tibby. Tibby was the baker who had made the delicious rolls for the prince but had been banished from the castle. When Tibby heard the news that the prince was looking for her, she moved as far away from the castle as possible. Her years at the castle working for that selfish prince had been horrible. Also, she was so disappointed in the people of the kingdom and their unkindness that she wanted to be far from all their contention. She wanted nothing more to do with baking for the unkind, fussy people in the kingdom. So Tibby, her husband Nicholas, and their daughter Molly moved into a small cottage at the very edge of a peninsula, which is an area of land that juts out from the main land mass and is nearly surrounded with water, far away from those unkind people. There, near the shores of the mighty ocean, the happy little family made an orchard farm. Molly loved everything about her life. She loved her mother's scrumptious home-cooked food and her thoughtful words. She loved her father's jolly character and his imaginative stories. Molly's father taught her to identify and appreciate all the plants, flowers, and trees in the area. She especially loved the orchards that her family grew. Exotic and colourful fruits filled the air, and the sweet fragrance mingled with the faint, salty smell of the ocean air. Molly even loved the chores that she was assigned, and she did them with a positive attitude. She loved the chorus of happy clucking from the chickens when she fed them. She loved hearing the pigs squeal with delight when she poured slop into their trough. She loved the smooth feel of dough as her mother taught her to knead and bake her fabulous rolls. Molly sang her favourite song as sweetly as a nightingale as she weeded around the zucchinis in her garden. Oh, may my song echo across the ocean far and reach to my Creator above the mighty stars. He is the grand architect of all my eyes can see, the designer of the rolling hills and the chasms deep. Oh, may my song echo across the ocean far and reach to my Creator above the mighty stars. Molly's favourite place was a little grassy knoll above their cottage. She often climbed the knoll and sat against the gnarled trunk of her favourite old oak tree. She knitted or read and thoroughly enjoyed listening to the wind whisper through the trees like 1,000 faint tinkling bells. As Molly sat atop this knoll one day, she spotted a familiar blue and white ship sailing toward their shore. She jumped up and ran towards the cottage. "Mother, father," she cried, "Uncle Michael's ship is coming." Out of breath, Molly flew through the doorway of the little cottage and helped her parents hastily prepare for the guests that would soon be arriving. Michael, Molly's uncle, had planned to take Molly's father and loads of their produce to the main city of the kingdom, but Molly's father could not go. "Molly," said her father, "I have been having horrible stomach aches the last few days. I do not feel well enough to sail with Uncle Michael. Would you like to go in my place?" Molly was absolutely delighted. She had never been on a ship before. As they travelled around the coast down to the royal city of the kingdom, Molly loved standing on the deck and feeling the salty breeze blowing through her hair. On the 2-day voyage, her uncle told her all about the prince's miraculous change of heart. When they arrived in the city, Molly was astonished by the magnificent castle. "Is it true that the prince and the king have suddenly turned kind and generous?" "Yes," Michael replied, "but I wish I could say that for the people of the kingdom. They still remain so thoughtless and selfish." Molly quickly saw that this was true. She was especially disappointed when she saw a group of poorly dressed children outside the castle walls. As people walked by the children, they shouted at them, and occasionally someone even threw a rotten tomato at them. Molly ran over to the children. "Children, why do you stay here by the castle walls? Where are your parents?" "We have no parents," said the oldest. "We are brothers and sisters, 8 of us. Our parents died of the plague 4 years ago. We have come from a far foreign land to the castle to beg help from the prince. We have heard of his kindness, but he is away until this evening, and we are waiting for him. The people do not want us here because we are poor and not from their kingdom." "Oh, you sweet dears," Molly cried. "How brave you are to have travelled so far. You must be so hungry." Molly went and retrieved her bag from the wagon. Her mother had packed a huge bag of her wonderful rolls. Molly distributed them to the children, then despite the children's dirtiness, she gathered them around her. Setting the youngest in her lap, she talked to them about having courage and kindness, and she taught them her favourite song. She told them all about the plants and flowers on her little peninsula. She even told them some of her father's stories. As the children ate and sang and listened, their worries melted away, and for the first time in a long time, they felt peace and contentment. Molly stayed with the children for a few hours, but then it was time for her to go sell the produce she had brought with her. She first hugged each of the children and told them to remember her song and sing it whenever they needed strength. When the prince arrived back at the castle that evening, he heard that a group of orphaned children had come to petition his help. He immediately went out the castle gates to meet the children. As he began to speak to them, he saw the pile of remaining rolls next to them. They were the exact shape and golden colour of the rolls that he had grown up eating. "May I have a roll?" he asked the children. "Of course," they all said. As the prince bit into the roll, he knew instantly that these rolls were made by the baker who once lived at the castle. "Children, who are you? Where did you get these rolls?" the prince cried. As the children told the prince about their sad plight in life and the sweet and kind young lady who had so graciously given them the rolls that morning, the prince's eyes widened and his heart leapt. "She sang to you and told you stories, and she had never met you before?" "No, we had never met her before, but she spent hours with us giving us encouragement and hope. She told us to sing this song whenever we needed strength." The children then sang the song together like a little choir, and the prince could not believe it. "Children, I believe I have found my rolls, and I may have just found the young woman that I would like to marry. I have been searching high and low for a young woman with this type of character. Tell me everything you know about her." The prince took the children into the castle as they told him all about Molly's farm on the little peninsula. The very next morning, the prince and the 8 children all bathed, and in new clothes they boarded a royal ship and set off to find Molly. Now you'll have to wait until the next story to find out how this all turns out. There are yet some mysteries to be solved. In the end, you will learn how the Kingdom of Kind got its name. But for now, let's think about what was started because Molly stopped and helped the children. If she hadn't taken the time to show them kindness, the prince may have never known about her. But now a magnificent story is about to unfold. What stories will be started in your own life when you show kindness to others?
Chapter 4, The Shepherd and the Squirrel. The last story ended with Prince Eric sailing towards Molly's picturesque peninsula. Can you guess how things turn out when the prince arrives? Well, first Tibby, Molly's mother, who used to be the baker at the castle, shrieked in terror when she saw the prince walking up her pathway to her farm. She turned pale, slammed her cottage door, and adamantly refused to allow Prince Eric inside. Molly told her mother what she had heard about the prince changing into a kind man, but it was too far-fetched for Tibby to believe. No tyrant who was that selfish and conceited could ever change, Tibby declared. He thinks only for himself. Surely he is deceiving everyone. Surely he's up to some kind of mischief. Tibby demanded that her husband and Molly stay inside the cottage until the prince left. She replaced her sheer curtains with dark opaque curtains so that the prince could not even see into the cottage. So for many days the prince slept on his ship at night and worked long, laborious hours in the farm during the day, whistling and singing. He diligently weeded the vegetables and the herb garden. He milked the cows and left fresh milk in a pail on the cottage doorstep. He patched the stable ceiling. He meticulously trimmed trees and bushes. He even had his lieutenants and soldiers help build a fence to keep the fierce wild rhinoceroses away from the fields. He collected wildflowers from the hillsides and left them on the doorstep, along with a note to apology to Tibby. The 8 orphan children Eric had brought with him helped him every day. In the evenings, Eric and the children wrote lyrics and sang songs and hymns outside Tibby's cottage. Tibby was shocked. She could not conceive of any reason why the prince was doing this. Finally, one day she opened the window as the prince was passing by. "Why are you here? What are you doing all this for? Why won't you leave?" she called. "For 2 reasons," the princess replied. "1, I have searched the kingdom high and low for you. I want to apologize for being so conceited and cruel. I especially want to apologize for never thanking you for your service." Tibby was speechless. "The second reason, continued the prince, is because I want to see Molly. I've heard of her kindness and I would like to meet her." Tibby could tell that the prince was being honest, so she invited him in the cottage for spaghetti and rhubarb pie. 6 months later, Eric and Molly were married. The day after the marriage, they adopted the 8 orphans. 2 weeks after that, Eric's father died peacefully and contently with the knowledge that he had become ready to meet his Creator. Eric then began to reign as king. One winter evening, a few weeks after King Eric began his reign, Molly and Eric sat drinking herbal tea and reading in the vast library by the glow of the bright candle. Outside, the snow was making a picturesque scene as it blanketed the world in white. This was a typical evening for the king and queen. Eric was determined to find some info of the mysterious two kings who had first ruled the kingdom of Kind. With any leisure time that they had, the happy couple scoured the books in the library, but they could not find a single word written about the two first kings. All of a sudden, Molly jumped. "What is that?" she shrieked as she pointed out the window. "Do you see that moving silhouette? It looks like a man in a long dark cloak sneaking around the end of the garden," replied Eric, as he stood up abruptly. "Guards! There's a mysterious man in the garden. He may be a thief. Please capture him and bring him to me immediately." Within 5 minutes, the guards had brought the mysterious man to the prince. He looked fatigued and wore a tattered, unique-looking cloak. "Who are you?" inquired the king gently but firmly. The man gestured towards the guards. "I will tell you as soon as you excuse your guards," said the man kindly, with a thick, unrecognizable foreign accent. "You will not want them to hear what I have to say." "Very well," replied Eric. "You are tied up and can do no harm." Eric excused the guards and then turned towards the man. "I'm honoured to meet you," said the man as he bowed. "I'm a humble shepherd from the very far land, a kingdom you most likely have never heard of. I have a message for you from the second king of Kind." Eric drew his breath with astonishment. He was utterly shocked. "But the second king of this kingdom died hundreds of years ago." "Yes, but he wrote a message before he died." "That's utterly impossible," cried Eric. "How could he have known who I was if I wasn't yet born?" "I suppose I should start from the beginning," replied the man. "Please do," said Eric as he untied the man and gestured him towards the sea. "Please sit down. You must be exhausted from your strenuous journey." The man sat down with a long sigh and began his story. I come from a long line of shepherds from the kingdom of Raylift. My fifth great-grandfather Gabriel was tending his flocks one day when the second king of Kind came to him. Evidently, the king had been watching Gabriel for several days before he approached him. The king had come to find a stranger in the far-off land that he could trust. Apparently, the king knew something was about to happen to him. He gave Gabriel a scroll, and he told him to hand the scroll and the key down from generation to generation until kingdom of Kind had a ruler that was humble and caring. Then the scroll was to be given to that king. "Word has reached out far off land for your goodness. You are the king who I give this scroll." The man pulled an old beige scroll from his cloak. "Before I give this to you," the man said, "I must prepare you for one thing." He bowed his head and whispered quietly, "You're not actually the rightful king of your kingdom."
Chapter 5, The Secret Scroll. The shepherd, fatigued from his long journey, retired to a bedroom suite, leaving Eric and Molly alone in the library. The couple sat in shocked silence. The winter wind whistled softly outside the window, and the soft crackling and popping of the fire in the fireplace echoed across the stone walls of the library as if it were a vast, lonely canyon. Eric's thoughts were spinning and swirling like the snowflakes outside. He held the ancient scroll in his hand, but he did not dare open it. "I feel that everything may change when I read this," he whispered. "I feel as if I am standing at one end of a bridge spanning a mighty chasm, and when I walk across this bridge, I will never be able to return to the other side." Molly put her warm, comforting arms around her husband as she whispered, "For so long you have wished to know about the first 2 kings who ruled this kingdom, and now you are holding the words of one of them. He wrote these words for you. Do not fear walking across this bridge, for I shall walk with you, and I will stay right by your side, no matter where the bridge leads. Yes, we are commencing on a new journey, an unknown journey, but it cannot be circumvented. We must have courage." Eric hugged his wife and nodded his agreement. Taking in a deep breath, he opened the scroll and began to read. "My name is King Veridian, and I'm the son of King Kind, the first king of the kingdom. If you are reading this scroll, you probably have never heard of me. To explain why, I must start from the beginning of the story. My father founded this kingdom. He helped hundreds of people escape from a far-off land ruled by a tyrant. He led the group for 2 months through the wilderness until we arrived at this beautiful land. The people made my father king, and because he was so good and gentle and generous, the people named him King Kind, and the kingdom was named the Kingdom of Kind. My father and mother wanted a large family, but they were only blessed with 1 child, me. My father named me Veridian because it is the name of his favorite color, a shade of green that reminds him of the mighty ancient trees in our forest. When I was a boy, he always told me, 'Son, you were designed to be like these trees, having strong roots and growing noble and straight, reaching up to our Creator God in the heavens.' When my father died, I tried to follow his example in all I did. Our kingdom thrived, and our people gained a reputation all over the world for being a kind and generous people. I loved to write, and I encouraged the writings of good and beautiful poetry, stories, and books. Our kingdom had more books than any kingdom in history. Unfortunately, darkness was growing like cancer in the heart of one audacious man. Tiff, the head of my army, he was once a good man, but he became jealous of me, and as jealousy can do if left unchecked, it changed him into a bitter man. Without any honor or civility left inside him, he stopped listening to his conscience, and his heart became hard and cold. But our kingdom was peaceful, and with no reason to use the army, I hardly had occasion to work with Tiff. I did not see what was happening. I had not been vigilant. Finally, it came to my attention that Tiff, who used eloquent but deceitful words, had been poisoning the minds of the soldiers with terrible lies for years. They wanted Tiff to become king. I investigated and found that I did not have one loyal soldier in my army. They all supported Tiff. I immediately released Tiff from his duties with the army. He laughed and said that I did not have the authority to release him from that position. He would soon be releasing me from my position as king. I was stunned. I secretly followed him when he left, and I overheard a discussion he had with 3 men. These men who had been visiting Tiff had come from the tyrannical land named Gorg that my father had escaped from before he founded this kingdom. Tiff and the men were discussing their final plot for Tiff to become king. You see, I had not yet had any children to inherit the throne. Tiff and his men planned to capture me and my wife that very day, bring us as prisoners to the land of Gorg, tell the people of the kingdom that my wife and I had been drowned at sea, and present to the people a forged document from me, naming Tiff as the king should anything happen to me. Once Tiff became king, he planned to destroy all records of the history of our kingdom, so generations to come would not remember my father or me. Tiff also planned to destroy all the good and beautiful books in our kingdom, because he hated beauty. Tiff and these men had been plotting this course for a long time, but they decided to act on the plot that very hour. As quickly as possible, I returned to the castle, threw money and jewels in a knapsack, and my wife and I slipped out of the kingdom unnoticed. We had travelled far, and I have decided to give this scroll to a trustworthy shepherd. I do not yet know how to save my kingdom, but my heart tells me that Tiff and his men may succeed in their plot. That is why I will leave the scroll with the shepherd. Tiff will wipe out all knowledge of me, so eventually I will not even be remembered. But he will not know about this secret scroll. I will ask the shepherd to have it handed down from generation to generation, until a king with a good heart reigns in the kingdom of Kind. Only then will things be able to be set right. What Tiff doesn't know is that my wife is expecting a baby in 5 months' time. We have not told anyone yet. If we are not able to take the kingdom back, Tiff and his audacious men will hunt my wife and me the whole world over with relentless vigor until we are found and captured. Our baby will never be safe. We do not know what will happen. But if we can stay secret until the baby is born, we may be able to save the baby from almost imminent eventual capture by leaving the baby on the doorstep of a humble but noble young couple I know, who live on a remote island in my kingdom. For their safety and the baby's, we cannot let the couple know who the baby is or who left the baby there. But if it is a boy, I will carve a small wooden tree to leave in the basket with the baby. If it is a girl, I will leave a carved flower. The carving will say, "Always be kind," on it. I will leave a note explaining that the tree or the flower is from the child's birth parents and should be kept safe and be handed down through the generations. In order for you to find the true heir to the kingdom, simply read a proclamation through the kingdom asking if anyone has a carved tree or carved flower that has been handed down from generation to generation. Then check the carving for the words, "Always be kind." I desire that my posterity will be able to rule this kingdom again. I know a good king's conscience would never allow him to be king if he really isn't the rightful heir. Thank you for your help. When Eric finished reading the scroll aloud, Molly and he were utterly aghast. Eric felt sick to his stomach. "Unbelievable!" he exclaimed quietly. I am not the rightful king. I truly am not. I am not a king at all. This castle doesn't belong to me. My fourth great-grandfather was a deceitful traitor. I have read in the history books how he was unkind and even cruel, and lived in extravagance like all the kings of kind after him. But I did not know he was a traitor. I'm not sure I know who I am anymore." Molly stood abruptly. "You know exactly who you are, Eric. A kind, compassionate, hard-working, thoughtful man. This does not at all change who you are. No, you are not the rightful king, but you did not know that until now." Late into the night, Eric wrestled with his feelings. They felt as gnarled as the trunk of the big wooden oak beside the castle. Although he lay nestled between the smooth silk sheets in his broad, ornately carved bed, he felt as if he was sleeping in a bed of thistles. He realized that he had indeed crossed a bridge and could never go back. He tossed and turned until he finally fell into a profound and much-needed sleep. In the morning, gentle sunlight poured through Eric's window like a breath of fresh air, wrapped him in a warm golden glow, and slowly woke him up. Eric sat up as he recalled the events of the previous evening. A smile slowly spread across his face, and he turned to Molly, who had just awakened. "I do not need to be king," Eric stated. "I have more important titles that can never be taken from me. Husband, father, and friend. I do not need to be a king to be happy. After all, the 3 keys to happiness that I learned while staying with Peter and his son Nathan have nothing to do with being king. Anyone can use those keys in any situation they are in. And that is exactly what I am going to do. I cannot wait to explore the other side of the bridge. We must tell our children. But first, I must deeply thank the shepherd for his sacrifices and efforts in bringing me the scroll." Much to his disappointment, though, the shepherd had already left. But his children responded well to the news. "We are a family," said the oldest boy. "Royal or not, we will always be happy because we have each other." Over a breakfast of gourmet cocoa, warm vanilla scones, and golden croissants, Eric looked out on the acres and acres of the castle grounds. He ached inside, knowing that he would need to leave his beloved castle, the gardens and the orchards, when the true king was found, but he did not dwell on his sorrow. "Molly and my dear children," began Eric, "we must work ceaselessly to find the true heir of the kingdom." "Yes," said his youngest boy with golden curls as he sat on Eric's knee in his brown knickers. "But father, what if the king cannot be found?" Eric hadn't considered that possibility. Could he really go on being king when he knew he was not the rightful heir? He knew his conscience would not let him. But who would then be king? "And father," piped at the youngest daughter, "what are we going to do if the king is found? Where will we go? Where will you work, and what will we do if the king is a horrible man?" Eric hadn't had time to think about those things either. "We will take everything one day at a time, children." That very day, Eric had an epistle sent out to every village. By order of King Eric, anyone in possession of a wooden carved tree or a carved flower handed down from their ancestors is to come to the castle to claim an invaluable treasure.
Chapter 6, The Rightful King. Eric's heart was pounding like hooves of galloping horses. His epistle had been delivered to the people of his kingdom the evening before, just as the sun was setting. Now the morning sun had barely emerged from behind the low hills, and the servant had just informed Eric that a man was waiting in the main entryway, a man with a carved flower. "I'm about to meet the rightful king," Eric exclaimed to Molly as he hurriedly combed his thick hair. "Although I was hoping we would find the king, I'm astonished that he came so quickly. Actually, I wonder if he would come at all. I have been wondering all night what we should do if the second king of kind was not successful in bringing his baby to safety. But he was, and now I am so anxious that I can hardly bring myself to open these doors and meet the man." Molly smiled and gave Eric a gentle nudge. "Our curiosity is about to turn into knowledge. Let's meet the rightful king." Eric pushed open the ornately carved wooden doors, and the couple entered the capacious entryway. A man with long, crazy black hair and a sharp nose, beady black eyes, and a crooked smile bowed deeply. "Your Highness," he began in a coarse, unpleasant voice, "it seems I have something of interest to you." The man's shrewd eyes narrowed. "But I am intrigued. Why would the king want my family heirloom and antique of a immeasurable worth to my beloved family? And what makes you think that I'm going to hand over something so precious? I demand that to know the reward before I show the item to you. I may request more than what you have offered in exchange of my carving." Eric wasn't aghast and utterly dismayed. His thoughts were swimming, and he felt like agonized pit in his stomach. How could he let the lonesome man rule the kingdom? He turned to Molly, whose jaws had dropped. Neither of them could utter a word. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather patch. "It is here," he said. "Tell me the treasure you are offering in exchange of my item." Eric uttered a silent prayer, and he felt a gentle peace come over him. He took a deep breath, collected his thoughts, and said sedently, "Sir, we are not going to take your item from you. If this is the item we're looking for, you will be able to keep it and receive the treasure. Has this item been handed down by your ancestors?" "Of course," replied the man with a sneer as he handed the pouch to Eric. Eric pulled a dirty miniature wooden carving out of the pouch. It was roughly cut, but it resembled a flower. "Is it authentic?" whispered Molly, so quietly that Eric could scarcely hear her. Eric turned the carving over and over in his hand and searched for the words, "Always be kind." There was no words carved anywhere. "I'm afraid," said Eric in utter relief, this is not the authentic carving for which we are searching." A few hours later, an astounding long line of people stretched like a long snake from the castle gates to the village centre. Each person clutched a carving of a flower or a tree, and each person claimed that the carving had been handed down by their ancestors. "They are all dishonest, scheming scoundrels," Molly declared as she watched the people arguing and jolting each other roughly as they tried to cut in line. "I'm sure all those flowers and trees were just carved this morning." Eric sighed. Yes, but perhaps one of them is the rightful king. We must check them all. And so they did. One by one, the carving proved authentic. There were no words written on any of them. The last person in line was an old woman with greedy eyes. "This is what you're looking for?" she cried as she thrust a poorly carved wooden flower into Eric's hand. "No," said Eric after examining the flower, "it is not." The old lady hobbled away angrily, and Eric and Molly left with the only sound of the sharp winter wind banging on the castle windows as if they demanded to be let in. "I've absolutely no intention of remaining the king when I'm not the rightful heir," Eric stared adamantly as he walked with Molly to the library. "Somehow, somewhere, we must find the genuine king." 3 weeks later, Eric sat at his desk in the library, next to the big window, writing slowly on the smooth paper with his quill. Ever since Peter and Peter's son, Nathan, had taught Eric how to recognize and appreciate beauty, Eric had started writing down his observations and feelings in the form of poetry and stories that he delighted the children with at bedtime each night. Suddenly a voice interrupted Eric's writing. "May I see what you're writing?" Eric whirled around. He couldn't believe his eyes. There stood Peter in his thick winter travelling cloak. A bright smile spread over his kind face. Eric couldn't be more grateful to see anyone. Ever since Eric had shipwrecked and was taken in by Peter, Peter had felt like a father to Eric. That evening the servants had prepared a wonderful dinner to celebrate a celebration of Peter's visit. Eric, Molly, and their 8 children and Peter entered the dinner hall. Happy laughter and voices were dancing and bouncing off the stone walls. As Eric pulled out his chair to sit down, he noticed a beautiful made but worn carving of the tree in the middle of his dinner plate. He picked it up and turned it over, read the carved words, "Always be kind," and let out a cry so loud that instantly a hush fell over the room. Molly went over to Eric. He gently placed the authentic carving into her hand, and she too let out a cry after seeing the words carved into the tree. "Who? Where? How?" Eric was so astounded he couldn't even utter a complete sentence. "It is mine," said Peter. "I'm sorry I could not come until now. I could not travel because of winter storms we had. This tree was given to me by my father. It was given to my father by his father, and so on. My father told me that the tree was placed in a basket with my 3rd great-grandfather when he was left on the doorstep, and that a note asked that the tree be handed down from father to son. It obviously had to be a mystery to our family, but also a very precious item to us. The words on the tree, always be kind, have always inspired me and pushed me to follow that counsel. I cannot conceive for any reason you would want the tree, but I know it must be important. But if there is any way, I would like to keep the carving so I can pass it down to my son. I do not need any treasure. I'm content with the life I have. My wife and son are all the treasure I need." Silence reigned in the capacious dining hall. Finally, Eric stood up. He could not contain the huge smile spreading across his face. "Truly, this is unbelievable. It's perfect. It couldn't be better. Wait here. No one say a word," Eric commanded as he ran from the room full full of astonished people. 10 minutes later, Eric finished reading the scroll out loud to everyone at the table. He looked up and saw tears streaming down Peter's face. Then Peter bowed his head. I cannot be king. I am an ordinary man. I do not even want to be king. You are not an ordinary man, Eric insisted. No one is an ordinary unless he is chosen to be. As a humble farmer, you did much good for those around you. As a king, you could do much good for many more people. You cannot evade this responsibility. You are the rightful king. 7 days later, copies of the secret scroll were posted in every village, and Eric passed the crown to King Peter, who began to rule. Eric, Molly, and their children moved to the picturesque peninsula where Molly was raised. Eric built a charming cottage on Molly's favorite grassy knoll overlooking the vast blue ocean. Molly's father was too old and too sick to work, so Eric ran the orchard farm and was deeply content with his life. He rejoiced in working with flowers and the rich soil. He loved having time to teach, play, and tell stories to his sweet children, and he loved visiting his mother-in-law, Tibby, who became a great friend to Eric and often baked him fresh rolls. Peter and his son adjusted to life in the castle and found much to be grateful for. They both loved learning, and they were thrilled to inherit such a large library. But Peter soon became discouraged. There were so many books, but none of them spoke of the Creator. Peter was also disappointed by the greed and unkindness he saw in the kingdom. One day, as King Peter sat pondering under the huge oak tree behind the castle, he came up with a plan. He visited Eric and convinced him to write a book that would not be an ordinary book. It was to be an autobiography of the heartless king living in excessive extravagance, who is shipwrecked on an isolated island, finds the 3 keys to happiness, and then learns that he is not actually a king. Eric wrote in vibrant, beautiful, eloquent deal about his experience of changing from cruel, heartless, and miserable tyrant to a happy, content, and humble orchard farmer. This book was so popular that nearly everyone in the kingdom read it and found it fascinating. Many people were encouraged to finding the 3 keys to happiness themselves, as a slight change began in the kingdom. Then the king made a huge announcement. There was to be a writing contest. All who wanted to be participants would need to write on topics that were good and beautiful, includes reference to the mighty Creator. The winner would have their poems and stories or books published. Everyone wanted to read the winner's writing, and the good and beautiful literature began to flow the kingdom. As the citizens in the kingdom read about the characters being generous and grateful, the citizens in the kingdom started following these examples. Within a few years, the citizens of the kingdom of Kind became happy and kind-hearted, like those who originally found the kingdom. And now our story will end where it began. It was a beautiful summer morning as Eric began his journey to the castle to visit Peter. The sunlight danced like hundreds of thousands shining drops of crystal along the tips of the ocean waves. He turned the corner and an old woman sat on the side of the path selling knitted socks. A pink pair of socks with rose embroidery on them caught Eric's eyes, and he purchased a pair for one of his daughters. As he paid the lady, he looked into the lady's gentle face and gasped. It was the the old lady to whom he had thrown the coins that landed in the mud. After the old woman had told him the story of the kind farmer who had saved her that night, Eric and the woman made a plan. Together they travelled to the spot where Eric had thrown the coins into the thick, oozing mud. It took 7 hours, but Eric, using a spade, dug until he found the 7 coins. Then Eric and the woman paid an unexpected visit to the farmer and presented him and his wife with the coins as a thank you from having saved the woman's life that night. If you could have been in that humble cottage that evening having dinner with Eric and the old woman and the farmer and his wife, you would have heard laughter. You would have felt love, and you would have seen 4 humble people who are deeply happy. So we see the happiness does not come from being a king, being rich, or having constant fun and adventure. Wherever you are and whatever is going on around you, the 3 keys of happiness can always be used: gratitude, service, and work. So if you ever find yourself feeling unhappy, look around and list what you are grateful for, serve someone, and do work, and you will find yourself happy.
If you'd like to know how to find all of our stories, type Living Books for World Changes into the YouTube search bar, press go, select Living Books for World Changes videos, and you can find all our stories there. We upload new stories every Thursday. We love sharing stories with you. Come back and don't forget to like and subscribe.